I'm Nicole, welcome to my channel, and in this video we're going to be making BMO, the adorable little robot.
If anyone tries to hurt me, I will kill them.
I started off with a rectangular piece of foam and just made it BMO shaped. It's very easy to cut, and then I made myself a fancy little template so that everything comes out the correct size. Now, since we're using styrofoam, obviously this can't go in the oven, so we'll be using Fix-It-Sculpt, which is an epoxy clay. It comes in two parts, you mix it together really well, and then it'll dry on its own. I'm just going to cover our styrofoam completely with the clay so that it stops making a mess all over my studio. This is like the bones of our BMO. We'll be adding more clay on top of it. Now that we have our first layer of clay, I'm going to cut out some of it. This is going to make areas for BMO's screen and some of the plugs and some of the vents and things like that on their body. Now, since this is an air dry clay, I only have so long to work with it, so that's why we're going to be working in stages, letting some areas dry where we work on other ones. You'll see me using a lot of templates for this project, and it just helps me keep things in the right spot. You can get things off and then it no longer looks like BMO, so that's where your templates are really going to help you out. It's also going to help you out with keeping the scale correct. Now here I'm not worrying too much about how pretty this looks. This is like the bones of our BMO bones. And we're going to build on top of this with more layers of clay. Now that I have my major indents taken care of, we can move on to the buttons. Did I forget some indented places? Maybe. That's okay. I'm just using some epoxy clay on a piece of glass and some cutters. The trick to this is putting water on these cutters and spinning it. You want the clay to stick to the glass and not to your cutter. That way you can remove the clay and you're not moving these around too much because it's just going to distort them. Water is your friend with epoxy clay. Use it to smooth it out. Another thing I'm going to warn you about this project is there's a lot of sanding. I'm talking max sanding, so much sanding, you guys. It's a lot of sanding. But it's going to help us get those nice sharp edges that we're going to need to make a cute little robot. Now that our base layer is dried, we can start adding the more nice layer on top. I'm going to try to get it as smooth as possible inside of these inserts because it's going to mean less sanding later. I went ahead and let my buttons dry and you can see they came out pretty good. They're going to need a little bit of sanding to refine their shape. Now to cut down on some of my sanding, I'm going to run this through my belt sander. You can see it takes off the majority of the uneven clay. Now we can start sanding the buttons because we're going to need this for the next step when we add more clay to the body. And I just sand the heck out of these until I get them nice and smooth. Using this type of sandpaper is super helpful, especially if something's not completely flat. And you can see it's starting to look like a BMO. I did forget to add her little ports in the front though. Don't worry, I wasn't even frustrated, not even a little bit. I always put my small pieces into a little condiment container or I will lose them, pro tip. Now of course, we're back to our templates. You're just going to trace over the back and then you can put it on top of your clay and use your finger, and that's going to put the pencil onto the clay. I'm going to be using polymer clay for the faceplate. Here I'm just cutting it out and I'm not removing it from the tile. I'm going to bake it just like this, and that's going to keep it as flat as possible. Getting in all those nooks and crannies can be tricky, but I found that cutting down the sandpaper and using some tweezers can really help you out. I want to get all these areas sanded before we start adding more clay because they're going to be a little bit harder to reach. Now, since we want to do interchangeable faceplates, I knew I was going to need a way to push the faceplates off instead of using some type of tool that would damage the faceplates. So this is my solution. Is it the best one? Who knows, but it's what I'm working with. Man, I am aggressive with this drill. That epoxy clay is tough. And now that I have our faceplate, I can refine the area it needs to sit into. Now on BMO, her faceplates sit indented a bit on her body, so I'm going to go for that same look. It's also going to make the faceplates look nice when we set them inside of it. But that means I'm going to have to do a lot of tweaking. And by tweaking, I mean slightly destroying. Alright, but that's the best I could do to get it to fit. Now I have to rebuild it up and fix it. After we have that area built back up, we can start adding the clay to match it. We want to do the whole front of the BMO, and I want to add enough clay so that I can push the buttons into the clay. That way they look like real buttons. I also realized my BMO was a little bit wonky and I had to level it out a bit. Using a little water always helps it blend in really nicely. I'm also using a little water on the buttons. That way they don't stick in the clay and I can wiggle them around a little bit. That way the buttons will fit in perfectly. I say perfectly, there's going to be a lot of sanding involved. Now that I have the skin of our BMO added to the front, I'm going to start adding it to the rest of the sides and just blending everything together. These ports weren't deep enough, so I just went ahead and started carving them. The nice thing about epoxy clay is it carves and sands so nicely. Now I wanted the faceplates to be thin and strong, so casting these in a urethane plastic is going to be the way to go. I'm just making a simple 1-part mold. I actually have a video tutorial on this as well. Don't ask why the silicone is now red. I had a situation, I fixed it. At this point, my videos are just a girl who gets in situations and then has to fix it. But anyway, now we're adding clay onto the back as well and blending that into the others. Sometimes I wait a day and let things dry so I can move on to another area without smushing it. That is one of the drawbacks of an air dry clay. But for me, the strength of epoxy clay is worth it. Here you can see I'm trying to smooth my 2 layers of clay together. Once again, less sanding. You're going to want the least amount of sanding. Some water on a brush is a great way to help smooth things out. I went ahead and made some tiny screws for the back plate on BMO. Super easy to make, super adorable. Those went with the other tiny parts. Now everything is dry and we can start sanding. So much sanding, so many grits, so much sanding. And of course, when you're doing this kind of sanding, you want to wear a mask that is rated for dust particles, eye protection, and protect your hands if you're using something like a sanding belt like I did here. I would first use my sanding belt to get off the majority of the clay, then I went in for all the refining. Now the key to good sanding is going to be starting off with a harsher grit, which is going to be a lower number, moving to higher grits, which is going to be a higher number. The lower grits are going to help you get the majority of the material off, and the smoother ones, which are the higher grits, are going to help you smooth everything out. Here you can see that I accidentally sanded off the little imprint for my button, so I had to carve that out by hand, which took ages. But you can see once that button fits, oh, so satisfying. And if you're new to my channel, you should know that I mess up a lot, and here you can see these gray flecks. That is bad. That is because I didn't mix my clay good enough, and that was uncured parts of the epoxy, so I had to dig that out with an X-Acto and then fill in those millions of tiny holes where that uncured clay was, because it would never cure and it would probably mess up our paint. So after that dried, I went ahead and sanded it. Your fingers are going to be the best thing for figuring out if something is smooth or not. And now I can refine the shape of where our little faceplates are going to fit. And oh yeah, she looks good. Now there's a little port underneath the screen, so I went ahead and used a drill bit for that. Super easy and effective. Then I made yet another template. This is going to be where BMO speakers are. I do it in pencil, and then I just use my drill to drill out some holes. I didn't go super deep, just deep enough to make it look like there was something there. I'm once again using my template to add the access panel and VHS slot on the back. I'm using these tools called bead reamers, and these are going to make it appear like there's something actually there. Be careful with these. Yes, I've stabbed myself with them before and it hurts. Now I drilled out a little area for our tiny little screws, add some epoxy sculpt, and as you can see, they are slightly functional. I felt very cool when I did that. And since I'm the queen of templates now, I'm making even more. These ones are for our face plates. I'm not super good at just painting things straight out the gate, so these templates are going to help me. Here I have all of my casted face plates and I'm going to sand them. These markings let me know where things are uneven so that I don't get too carried away on a belt sander, which is very easy to do. Once my face plates are all sanded on the bottom, I can work on sanding the sides and making sure that every single face plate fits correctly into BMO's body. One important thing that I noticed is these face plates only fit in perfectly one way, so I'm going to be adding markings so I know which way is up, so that when I paint them later, it's not a problem. Here, I made another little template. This is going to show me where to add my magnets, that way they all line up and they're all in the same spot. And you can see my arrow shows me which way the templates need to face. I'm going to inset these small magnets, so I'm using my drill to drill out just enough space for them to sit inside of. Then I'm going to super glue them inside of each hole, making sure that each one is level. Now I push the magnets inside of BMO's body down so that they sit flush. If I didn't do that, the magnets would push the faceplate up. Now magnets are very tricky. You have to pay attention to which way they're orientated, or the magnets are going to repel each other and it's not going to work. Did I have to redo a bunch of them over again because I messed up? Yes, I did. I also want to make a cracked BMO screen, so I went ahead and used that bead reamer to make the cracks into the screen itself. Now I can finally test my little design, and it works perfectly for pushing the faceplates out without damaging them. Now I can work on the BMO letters. I really want to get these right so that they don't look off or wonky, and once again, that's where a template comes in. I did it first in pencil and then in permanent marker, that way it wouldn't be smudged off. Now, since I'm not good at freehand painting and it's frustrating for me sometimes with things that need to be precise like letters, I decided to just chisel them in with my bead reamers. And I feel like it looks really good and it helped out so much with painting. But now we need some armholes, so I used a big drill bit and added some holes for our arms and legs. Now I hooked the end of my armature. That's going to make it so when I push it into the clay and add more clay, it's going to be locked in. If it's just a straight piece of wire stuck in, you may be able to just yank it out. So this is just added security. You're going to see me adding some thinner wire on top of our thicker wire. This is going to make it so the clay sticks to our armature and doesn't slide around. I'm going to be using extra firm Cos clay for the arms. That way I can pose them afterwards. Here you just want to start off with a nice thick noodle, cut it down the middle, and then you can open it up and insert your wire right inside. Now, one thing I noticed is that BMO's arms change length depending on what they're doing or what they're holding, so I had to kind of pick a length. I do wish that I would have picked a stiffer armature wire so that I could have gotten more poses, but you live and you learn. Now I went ahead and baked the arms, that way I could build the hands without squishing the arm part. I want to make sure I blended them together really well. Here, we're starting off with just 3 little fingers. BMO only has 4, like everybody in Adventure Time. And I'm cracking up because her hand kind of looks like a little kitty paw. That is until I add the thumb and start shaping out the fingers a little bit better. I even add the little bit of a heel of a palm to her hand, and then I made it want to grip. That way I can put stuff in BMO's hand later. And I thought of this after I had already started the project, and I was just so excited that I came up with this idea. I went ahead and did the other hand, but I left it open. Kind of looks like a little karate chop hand, which also makes me laugh. There was the tiniest bump where the hand met the arm, and I didn't like that. So I just sanded it smooth so you couldn't tell they were ever 2 pieces. Then we can shove a bunch of clay into our body and stick the arm in. Then I just filled in the gap with some extra epoxy clay. Now we have a solid body and some bendy arms. And one warning I'm going to give you is that armature wire can be very pokey and scratchy. So if you see a bunch of scratches on my hand, you know what happened. Here, I just add the clay on top of our armature wire and start connecting it to the body, and then I'm trying to smooth it out as much as possible and getting rid of a little bit of the excess clay. I would advise you to get only as much clay as you need. I left on a little bit too much, which meant I had to do a million more hours of sanding, which I was very much over with at this point, as you can tell. So I had to sand the legs until they were about the same thickness as BMO's arms. Then I could add the tiny little feet. And I was super excited because that means I'm almost done sanding. They're very simple. I smooth them out as much as I can, and then when they dry, I can go ahead and do my last sanding. Thank goodness. Now that BMO's done, we can move on to making things for BMO to hold, and I started off with a sword because this little robot deserves a I can't say that, a you-know-what sword. So after we made BMO a you-know-what sword, we're gonna make a little Adventure Time bee, and these bees are hilarious, so I knew I wanted to make one for BMO to hold. I start off with some UV resin and I make some very simple wings. Then we can move on to making the body. The body is also very simple. He's just a little chunk with some legs. So I'm gonna make some very simple little legs and a stinger. These guys don't have any antenna, which makes them very funny and very Adventure Time, so I skipped those. I used my heat gun to flash cure the legs just so they're cured up enough to stick into our body, that way I can bake everything together. But I'm going to use some clay adhesive first so our bee doesn't fall apart, because that would be super embarrassing. You're just going to stick your little legs in and your little stinger, and bam, we have the makings of an adorable, very round little bee. I also stuck a toothpick in him so he was easier to hold. We're going to need that hole for later. Then I made sure that my wings fit, but I took them off before I baked it. I just used 2 colors of clay to make a very simple little candy cane to represent the people of the Candy Kingdom, and we're going to put a little face on it later. Now I left some armature wire coming out of BMO's legs so that it can fit all the way down into the base. We want this little robot to be sturdy and not be falling all over the place. So to keep my little holes at the bottom open, I put in some sticks, and then I'm going to glue my tin foil down to the base. That way I can build my clay on top of it. Once I have the tinfoil built up the way I like it, I can then add the clay. I'm not too worried about how this looks, I'm more worried about the shape, because we're going to be adding static grass on top of it. Here I'm just smushing all the clay together and using some water so that there's no big bumps. I use some saran wrap to keep my BMO from sticking to the base, and then I can pull them right out. And we have a perfect impression for them to fit into after we finish the grass. I did notice the wood on the base was flaking just a little bit, so I'm going to use some matte Mod Podge to seal it. Once it dries, you can't even tell that anything's even there, and I won't have to worry about this wood falling apart. Then we can work on painting BMO, which is my favorite part. I'm going to use my airbrush here to help me get some nice even coats, get everything nice and uniform, and give us a nice base to work with. I tried to get BMO's colors as close as I could for the body. I nailed most of it, some of it is a little off, but that's okay because this is my BMO and nobody else's. This is where I realized I had nowhere to set BMO as it dried, so we just did this dancey dance. Now I can move over to painting all of the buttons, which was so satisfying. One of my gloves I couldn't get all the way on because my hands were a little moist, so this is what you get. It's a good look, isn't it? You are going to want to make sure that any paint you use is compatible with Cosplay. It does not like all paints. I did have some cracking, so I'm going to have to use a different paint on the arms and redo them. Now I made BMO a cute little red flag because I thought it would be funny for them to be holding a red flag with their suspicious face, and I can just picture them holding it up when anybody does anything weird or suspicious. Then we can go on to painting our bee, and I used pencil to mark everything out before I painted, and that was so helpful. And along with penciling on before you paint, if I'm going to be doing something with a lot of detail, I like to water down my paint sometimes. It just makes the coats go on really smooth. I added the tiniest face to our candy cane and a nice dry brush technique to our sword. This is going to give the sword a little bit of texture, which I really liked. Then I added a brass color so that there were 2 different types of metal on the sword. And here we're going to add some cool little stone colors that we're going to add resin to later. It's really going to make them pop. Then I just added a couple coats of green paint to our base. This may sound weird, but one of my favorite painting tools is actually a dotting tool. It allows me to get into deep crevices, especially things that are circular or rounded, and move the paint around. It would be a lot harder to do this even with a detailed paintbrush. I am a little disappointed because the color I picked for the slot and the speakers in the back, it's a little darker than I wanted it to be. And sometimes that just happens, but that's okay and I'm just gonna roll with it. Now I can start painting the letters, which was so much easier. I could work within the engraving and everything came out really sharp. And just to let you all know, the paper I'm using is tracing paper, and it's great for doing this transfer technique. It puts a very faint outline that I went over with pencil, and then I could start painting. As I started painting the faces, I started getting very nervous because I knew that the black outlines needed to be really crisp or they were going to look wonky. So I have a secret weapon, and that is going to be a fine point Sharpie. I knew that painting it by hand was going to just be way too hard, so the Sharpie worked perfectly. I did go over some of the bigger spaces like eyes with paint after, but I had a nice outline to work with, and I'm telling you, using a Sharpie was so much easier than trying to paint it freehand. I don't have a ton of footage of me adding the black marks with the Sharpie because I had to sit like a creepy little gargoyle to do it and the camera was just in the way. So sometimes you just gotta do it off camera. Now for the finishing touch on our sword, we're gonna be adding this resin bead effect that I love to do. I figured this out years ago and I've been doing it ever since, and I never get sick of using this effect. So I'm going to make the hole at the bottom of our bead bigger so I can insert an acrylic rod, that way BMO can hold it. Then I glued in our cute little wings and added top coats to all of our pieces. And one of my favorite things in this whole video is finally gluing these buttons in. And I will tell you right now, it was so worth the extra time and effort to carve out these spaces because they look like functional buttons and not just something glued on the body. I just wanted to take this time to thank you for watching this video, especially if you made it this far. Thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more of my crazy art content. Now on to static grass. Make sure you're using a respirator so you don't inhale any of this stuff. And yes, it gets everywhere. And yes, you can zap yourself with this little contraption if you're not careful, and I do it every time I use it. Just make sure when you set it down, you turn it off, or it will still be live and it can shock you. But now you can see this gives us the perfect little Adventure Time grass setup, and we can use some really nice strong glue to glue BMO into the base. And now our BMO is complete and we can move on to those snazzy little end shots.